Now that we understand the parts of a categorical proposition, we are going to acquire a very important skill, which is writing those propositions in standard form if we don't already see them in standard form. Not every time you see a proposition, it's going to be all dogs are animals, all SRP. There are going to be times when it's in plain language because we don't always talk like that. All this is that. Um, Sometimes we just talk in plain language or we write in plain language. And it is still a proposition, right? Because it's a sentence that is capable of being true or false, but it is not in standard form. And what does that mean? We'll talk about that. So you are going to have to learn the skill of translating propositions that are not in standard form into standard form. So let's talk about what that would look like. So a statement is in standard form when it is written like this. This is the way that we have been using propositions in examples, right? So with a quantifier, qualifier clearly delineated, a subject term clearly delineated, the copula and the predicate clearly delineated, right? So the example would be all dogs are animals. But as I was saying in my introduction, propositions aren't always written this way. But if we see a proposition that's not written this way, we need to translate it into this format so that we can work with it logically. So you will have to rewrite some propositions into standard form. So let's see what that would look like. Look at this example of a proposition from Numbers 23:19, God cannot lie. Now, is this a statement or a proposition? You know that we use those interchangeably. Yes, because it is a sentence that is capable of being true or false. But is it in standard form, the form that we're going to need to use moving forward? No, it is not, because you can clearly see the subject, you can see the predicate, but you don't see a copula. And you don't see a qualifier quantifier because it is implied. So how do you write this proposition into standard form? Let's look. So step one, the first thing that you want to do when you see a proposition not in standard form is to identify the subject and the predicate. In this case, the subject is God. Remember, because God is the one that is being predicated about. And how do you know what the predicate is? Because the predicate is what is being predicated about God, that he cannot lie. So the entirety of that cannot lie is a part of the predicate. Subject is God, predicate is cannot lie. If you were to just put lie, you would be wrong. That's not the predicate. And if you were to say no, but cannot is a copula, it cannot be the copula, because remember, the copula is some form of the verb to be. It is only is or is not, are or are not. Anything else is not a copula. So for this example, the entire predicate is cannot lie. So step one, identify the predicate. So once you have identified the subject and the predicate, then you can move on to step two. Step two is identify the qualifier quantifiers if there's any. So going back to the example, God cannot lie. We see that there is no all or no or some in front of God because God is a proper noun. God is the noun and it's a proper noun. It's his name, and it identifies that he is a person. So whenever we talked about this the last lecture, whenever you're dealing with a proper noun, Jodian, God, Jesus, you don't have to say all of Jodian or all of God is, because God is all of him. So right here, you're going to observe that there is no quantifier qualifier, but if there is one, you can note that. If there isn't one, don't write one in. All right. So identify the qualifier quantifier. And I put the Q under God because God here is functioning as the subject, but because there is no clearly stated quantifier qualifier, then we know that this is universal. It's telling us about the quantity of the proposition. It is universal. So once you've done step 2, you are identifying all the parts. You identify in step 1 the subject and the predicate. In step 2, you're just identifying the quantifier qualifier if there is one. You're going to move on to step 3. Now, chances are there is no copula because, as in the example that we have been looking at, God cannot lie, the statement is not in standard form. So if that's the case and there is no copula, you need to write in the appropriate copula. So in this case, God cannot lie. You can tell that what's happening is that this is not negating a thing. It's affirming that God is something. God is, right? So you are going to write the copula is, because how are you going to know if you should write is or is not? How do you know what the appropriate copula is? Just write a copula that does not change the meaning of the original proposition. If I were to put, for this example, God is not, cannot lie, it would change the meaning. So you want to make sure that the copula that you write in is appropriate. I want you to also get a habit at this point that whenever you see, you identify a copula or you write in a copula, circle it. I do these PowerPoints with colors because I want you to clearly see the parts in different colors. You can also use colors in your notes, whatever is going to help you to clearly see what the subject is, what the predicate is, and what the copula is. Do that. Colors help. But with the copula, I want you to put the habit in practice of circling it. Why? You're gonna see why later. It's gonna become so crucial in helping you to not make a mistake. So ensure that the copula that you use does not change the proposition and write it in. Now, you can have a step 4 if it is needed. Because as with the example that we just saw, let's go back and look at it. When we write in the copula, this proposition is actually logically accurate. However, it is difficult for our brains to process that because it is not grammatically correct, right? There's a difference between grammatical correctness and logical correctness. This proposition is logically in standard form right now. God is, cannot lie, is the standard form of God cannot lie. But it's going to be very difficult for our brains because our brains are going to continually say, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. So if that's the case, you can leave this, and I understand it logically. But for your sake and to help your brain not feel like, oh, it doesn't make sense to me because it doesn't sound right grammatically, you could do step 4. Step 4 is you can write in words that help to make the proposition intelligible or help to make it grammatically make more sense. You cannot change a subject. You cannot change a predicate, but you can write in other words for understanding's sake to make it make a little bit more grammatical sense. The key is so that I don't say that you did something wrong and grade you down, is whatever words you write in, you must put them in brackets. Why? So that I can clearly see that those that you understand that those are not a part of the original proposition. So what would that look like? This. So God is, so you see the subject, you see the copula, you see the predicate, and then I put a being that in brackets to make it make a little bit more grammar sense, right? So the final proposition is God is a being that cannot lie. You do not have to do step 4. You could do step 1, 2, 3, and you are perfectly okay. But if you really wanted to kind of make a little bit more sense because it's a little bit of a confusing proposition, you can do this. But you gotta be careful. And as we move forward, I'm gonna give you at different points caution. Remember, never change the subject, never change the predicate. Identify them first, highlight them in different colors, whatever you gotta do so that you don't change the subject and the predicate. Do that. So you see that the copula is, you see that I circled it. I want you to do the same. Subject is God, the predicate is cannot lie, and then these words we just write in to kind of help the proposition make a little bit more grammatical sense. So let's stop and do a little bit of a quiz to gauge what you have learned so far in formal logic. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to answer the questions. I'm not going to be able to hear you, but when I ask the question, I want you to shout out loud what you think the answer is. So true or false, an argument can be defined as a series of propositions. True or false? Did you say true? Then you're right. Awesome. Let's do another one. True or false? Jesus is God is a statement. What do you think? True or false? Did you say true? Then you're right. Give one example that is not a statement. You go ahead and give an example that's not a statement. I can't hear you, but if you said something that was a question, that was a suggestion, that was a command, that was an exclamation, you're correct. True or false? Syllogisms are inductive arguments. True or false? Syllogisms are inductive arguments. What's your answer? I hope you said false. True or false? Syllogisms are made up of 3 propositions and a conclusion. Is that true or false? I hope you said false. I know you did, because you've been focusing and studying and working hard. True or false? A proposition is the same as a premise. True, when used in an argument, right? So, what is a proposition made up of? What is a proposition made up of? Take a few minutes. All right. It's made up of subject and predicate. To make this answer a little bit more full, 4 parts, right? So quantifier, qualifier, subject, predicate, and copula. Name 3 kinds of propositions. Listen to the question very carefully. Name 3 kinds of propositions. Take your time. Hypothetical, disjunctive, and categorical. Categorical is what we're working with right now. And the final question, who's the best logic teacher? Even though we're not talking in person. So I'm joking. I'm joking. Laugh. It's funny. Maybe not. So we're still talking about categorical propositions, but there are four types of categorical propositions. One of the things that happens is in logic, we like to use symbols because we don't like to write out a lot and we don't like to use up all these words. And so we like to replace things with symbols as much as we can. Remember that the first symbol that you learned was the therefore symbol. You're going to learn some more. So there are four types of categorical propositions. And they are, another way to think about this, there are four different qualities that categorical propositions can fall into. Remember the quantity, quality, and quantity, right? So remember the qualities are affirmative and negative, and then the quantities are universal and particular. So of all the different arrangements of parts of the proposition, it's going to fall into one of these four categories. So you're going to either have a statement that says, okay, I ran ahead of myself. So if you have a statement that says all S is P, that statement is a universally affirmative statement. Do you remember why when we talked about quality and quantity? So another way of describing this statement that is all SSP, right, is calling it a type A proposition, right? So type A propositions look like this, all SSP. Another way to write the type A proposition is without the quantifier qualifier. So it could be S is P. Because remember that there's sometimes where the qualifier quantifier is unstated. And so that is universally affirmative now, because the quality and quantity of all type A propositions is universally affirmative. And as you look at this proposition, you see why. So recall what you learned from quality and quantity. When you're trying to find the quantity, you look at the qualifier quantifier. What are you looking for? You're looking for the quantity all or no or some. If you see all or no, it is universal, right? Now, as it relates to the quality, you're still looking at the quantifier qualifier, remember step one, right? But what are you looking for? You're looking for all or no. If it is all, then it is affirmative, remember? So if you don't go back and revisit our conversation about quality and quantity, study it until it becomes a part of you. So if you see all SSP, instead of writing that out all the time, we want to shorten that, and that is called a type A proposition. If you see a proposition that looks like no SSP, no dogs are animals, no men are honest, no S is P, so S is a subject, P is a predicate, no S is P, then you are going to call that a type E proposition. And look and pay attention that the quality and quantity of a type E proposition is universal negative. And based on what we just talked about, you can see why. And then pay attention also to how the type E proposition can be written differently. Because look at the screen, you see that the qualifier quantifier in the first example, no SSP, is before the subject where you want it to be, where you expect it to be. But the other way of writing it, the quantifier qualifier is not beside or not in front of the subject. So you would have to do step two in finding the quality, right? look at the copula, and you see that the copula is negative. S is not P. So this proposition is universally negative. Good. The other two options are particular affirmative. These propositions look like some S is P. Some of the subject is in the predicate. And this is when you see some, you know that the quantity is particular because it's not referring to all. Not all of the subject is in the predicate. So particular affirmative. Affirmative because you see the quality is affirmative. You could see that from the copula because the copula is affirmative. It is not, it is. And then final, and that's called a type I. The final one is a type O, and it is called a particular negative. And it looks like this. Some S is not P. Note right here that the copulas could also be R. So a type A could be all S R P. Or a type E could be no S R P, right? As long as it's an appropriate copula. So you need to commit these vowel names for the types of propositions to memory. And then it is also helpful for you to commit the quality and quantity to memory. If you don't remember, then reason through it. Oh, what is the quality of a type A proposition? Write it out, all SSP. Oh, the quantifier qualifier is all, therefore it's universal. Oh, the quantifier qualifier is all, therefore it's affirmative. Do that kind of reasoning through. If not, commit it to memory. If that doesn't work for you, just commit it to memory. All right. So this is a chart that breaks down what we just learned. So type A propositions look like all SSP or all SRP. The quantity is universal. The quality is affirmative. Type E proposition, no SRP. The quantity is universal. The quality now is negative, right? Because of that no. Type I propositions, some SRP. The quantity is particular because of that some, and the quality is affirmative. The final proposition type, some S are not P. The quantity is particular and the quality is negative. As I said with it before, either you reason it out or commit this chart to memory. So the other skill that I want you to have as it relates to understanding these four types of propositions is what they look like visually. And what they look like visually is going to help you with the next step after this, right? So logic is step on top of steps. So I'm giving you learn this step, learn this step, learn this step. So this is going to help you with the next step. We want to see what it looks like visually. So we are going to use what is called Euler diagrams, right? They're not Venn diagrams, they're Euler diagrams to depict what these terms are doing. You've seen it before, but we're going to actually explain it a little bit better now. So based on what you just learned, type A propositions, all S are P or all S is P, it would be visually depicted like this. Pay attention to the diagram that all of S, so you see the subject is yellow, all of the S is in the P. That's what this proposition is saying. It's saying all of S is in P. And so that's what it looks like. And this proposition is universally affirmative. Remember, we're trying to commit that to memory because it's saying that all of the subject is in the predicate. For example, all men are sinners. So based on the image, you would see that all men are in the category of sinners. All of the men would be the S, and then the P are the sinners. So that's what that would look like. What would a type E proposition look like? No S is P or no S are P. It would look like this. Look at the subject and the predicate. You see that the subject is not in the predicate at all? That's what this proposition looks like. None of the category of the subject term is in the category of the predicate term. So this proposition is universally negative. Remember, type E propositions are universally negative because it states that none of the subject is in the predicate. An example of this is no men are righteous. So what is that saying? That no man falls within the category of righteous things. So they're men and they're righteous things and they don't go together. That's what that proposition is saying. Let's talk about a type I proposition. What does that look like? A type I proposition, sum S is P, is only talking about the part of S that is in P. Only this little section that's highlighted yellow, it's only talking about the part of S that is shared by P, the part of the subject that's shared by the predicate. So it says, a type I proposition is particular affirmative because it states that some of the subject is contained in the predicate. Only that little part right there that's shaded. An example of this is some men are believers, right? So men are the subjects, right? And some of them are believers, right? But the predicate believers, there are some men that are, there are believers that are not men, right? So women. So this type I is only talking about the category of men that are believers. And finally, type O propositions, sum S is not P. This is what it looks like. It is talking about the part of the subject that is not in the predicate. So you see that the part that is shaded yellow is the part of the subject that does not overlap with the predicate. So type O propositions are particular negative because they describe the parts of the subject that are not contained in the predicate. An example of that is some men are believers. Some men are believers, and you saw what that looked like. But the men that are not believers are the parts of the subject that's not in the predicate. So hopefully these visuals help you to understand what these propositions are doing. We are going to move on to distribution in the next video. And so if you need to listen to these videos over and over again, please do so. Use the PowerPoints to help. Do whatever it takes to understand these concepts because they do build on each other. So see you next time.